In this video, we're gonna look at how to design a weapon or a prop for video games from concept to 3D. I'm designing a scythe for a futuristic slash post-apocalyptic setting, and for the concept, I'm using Photoshop. You can use a reference image as a base so you don't have to draw from memory. Basically, what you want to do is to draw a silhouette, then copy it and start iterating on it. Come up with simple or complex shapes. The goal here is to make something that looks cool. We're not worrying too much about the functionality of the weapon, so just let your mind run free. Come up with different looking shapes and see how they look next to each other. Also, depending on what you're designing, there might be some things you want to keep in mind. Like in my case, the scythe is a little too long to be properly equipped on a character's back, so I figured to make the pole extendable so it doesn't stick out that much. I also decided to add a little blade at the bottom because why not? Feel free to give as much definition as you want to your design. As long as it's comprehensible, you're good to go. Once you're done, repeat the same process 3 more times. Try to come up with different looking designs while keeping it aligned to the setting you chose. And like I said, the whole point of this first step is to experiment with different designs and see what looks best. You can do more than 4 silhouettes if you want. At the end of this step, you should have a good variety of designs to choose from. Once you're done, pick the parts you like the best. I also encourage you to ask others for feedback at this point, especially other artists. I decided to go with the double blade and the pole of the first one, the blade of the second one, bottom blade of the third one, and the blade and extension pole of the last one. Separate the parts and assemble them. Do the same process as before, but now go into more smaller details. As we go through the stages, you're gonna focus more on refinement rather than creation. Now do it again with the other one. I'm going with 2 designs at this stage, but again, feel free to do more. After you're done, you can pick and choose which parts you like again, but I decided to go all in with the bottom design. At this stage, you should minimize changing the shape of your design, and once you're done with all the refinements, you can start shading. Basically, what I do is that I paint the whole thing gray, and then start darkening or brightening up different parts of your design. This helps to pop out all the details and give you a clear idea on how your weapon's gonna look like. In Photoshop, I'm using the dodge and burn tools to do the shading, or rather just the dodge, since if you hold Alt, it does the opposite. Basically, think of which parts should be on top of what, and just darken the corners and lighten up the hard edges to show depth. Darken the round edges while brightening up the center, like here on the cables and the pole. So just using two tools, the dodge and the lasso selection tool, you can do the shading for the entire thing. You can also add a drop shadow to your layer, just double click on it, just so it's easier to see if you're working on the black or white background. At this point, you can probably go ahead and start on the 3D side, since texturing is a lot of times easier to apply and change in 3D, especially if you're using something like Substance Painter. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish the concept first, just for the sake of it. And basically, think of what each piece is made of and just grab a texture from the internet. You can use them as a base and modify them if you need to. So just create a mask and deform the texture to match the piece you're putting it on. Then you can change the layer effect and see what works best. A lot of times I either use overlay or soft light, and sometimes even multiply, but that ends up usually a bit too dark. But I suggest to try all the effects and see for yourself. Also, you should consider how your textures react to light. It helps to add more realism to your art. Think about how shiny or rough or metallic they are, and add some light reflection based on those. I also decided to add some lights to the blade to make it look more interesting. You can use an outer glow to make them shine. And I also added a lighting effect around the cables and the blade, so you should keep in mind how would something like this translate in 3D. And there you go, we have the concept. Now let's go and create this thing in 3D. I'm using 3D Max for this, but you guys can use any 3D software really. I'm not gonna do anything fancy, just a standard approach. I'm setting up a reference plane for our concept art. In Max there's a draw poly feature I'm using to make the blade. For poly count, if this is something that's gonna be repeated a lot throughout your scenes, you might wanna aim to have it be as optimized as possible. Even consider using LODs. But I'm not gonna do that for this video since this is gonna be a hero weapon. I'm drawing around the pieces so then I can extrude the polygons and create the details. And moving on to the rest of the weapon, there are some pieces that aren't entirely defined in the concept, but it should be easy enough to make up something. The blade, as I mentioned before, is supposed to collapse down to take less space, so I'm just adjusting its pivot. As for the cables, I'm using splines and just push them around to look natural. Now time for my favorite part, unwrapping the model. You can go very optimized if you want, but I'm basically just trying to overlap UVs as much as I can and leave the rest as is. And for rigging, it's also pretty simple. All I need for this weapon is 3 bones. One as root, another to control the extension pole, and the last one to rotate the blade. When it comes to skinning, only the cables deform with the bones, so that's the only part that needs a little effort. And that should do. Now for texturing, I'm using Substance Painter. First thing you want to do is to bake your mesh maps like so. And sometimes you might come across some artifacts like here with my ambient occlusion. Since all those rings share the same UV, we have that dark spot on all of them. You can fix these by adding ambient occlusion under your channels, removing it from the mesh maps, and adding it manually. So now I can just paint on it. And for the most part, you can just use the base or smart materials. Just drop it under your layers. Add a mask and play around with the values. You can also import a custom texture and just drag it into the scene, like with this circular steel texture. And for the cables, I'm just using the same texture I used for the concept art. In Photoshop, to make it seamless, just go to Filter, Other, and then Offset. Offset it by maybe 100 to 200 pixels and then fix those seams with the clone or the healing brush tools. I'm also using another filter to make it black and white. I'm gonna use this for the roughness and height map. You can add the levels modification to your layer to modify the texture, like I'm doing here to get the roughness right. I also added an emissive channel for the lights. You can export a white emissive texture if you want to dynamically change the color of them later in whatever game engine you're using, but I'm just gonna go with a basic static red color here. I'm exporting the textures in Unreal Engine format, since that's what I'm gonna use to set everything up. In Unreal, I just made a material and I'm adding multipliers for both my roughness and emissive textures so I can control them easier. I'm gonna go ahead and make a material instance and apply it to the model. I noticed the smoothing groups weren't showing up, so I just checked the import normals and re-imported the model to fix that. Another thing I noticed was that my textures didn't look as good as they did in Substance, so be ready to jump back and modify your textures as you need. And for the lightning effect, I'm using Niagara. Start with the static beam template and place it where you want it to be. Change the endpoint and set the length of the beam and the width by modifying the curve points. And then you can add a jitter position in the particle update to get this effect. You can also disable the ribbon tessellation to get it look closer to a lightning effect. Then I added velocity to bend the effect to the shape of the weapon. Just play around with the values and see what you like. And lastly, I'm just making a blueprint for the scythe and adding in the lightning effect we just made. And there you have it. Now let's see how it looks when it's wielded by Unreal Engine's mannequin. And that's it. Like and subscribe if you want to see more of this, and thanks for watching.